Good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to all the delegates and the esteemed panelists. We are just going online with the program, which you all know that this particular program we have ideated along with India Exim Bank. So, warm welcome to all the delegate speakers from whom I will be introducing soon. The theme of the today's conference is going to be virtual event is going to be on India's export preparedness and competitiveness in the reconfiguring global value chains. And we are extremely privileged to have a very, very esteemed panelist today for discussing this theme. And we also have, so very warm welcome to all of you, sirs, at the outset. Yeah. And it is my privilege to introduce to the larger audience the profile of each of our speakers so that later on our director, Mr. Sarosh Kumar, will be welcoming officially also the panelists and all the delegates who have tuned in for today's event. First, I'll introduce our DMD, Mr. C. Venkat Nageshwar, who is the Deputy General Manager with International Banking Group of the State Bank of India. Mr. Venkat Nageshwar, Deputy Managing Director, is currently the head of the International Banking Group of SBI, which is having about 200 offices in 34 countries with a business portfolio of more than about 57 billion and a staff complement of exceeding 3,000. Mr. Venkat is a career banker with about 37 years of experience and across wide domains, including corporate banking, retail banking, treasury, trade finance, risk, and compliance. Prior to assuming the current responsibilities, Mr. Venkat held the position of DMD in charge of global markets also. So we also have, in fact, a treasury man along with an IBG man here, which is the vertical for treasury as far as SBI is concerned. He was overseeing an overall treasury portfolio of India's largest bank with experience over money market, foreign exchange, equity, venture capital, strategic investments, etc. He's a permanent invitee to the bank's board meetings. Venkat is involved in various deliberations concerning the bank's overall operation. He's a member of the bank's Apex Credit Committee, Audit Committee, and other committees responsible for governance of the bank. Mr. Venkat is also a director in the boards of several companies and industry associations. He has been a part of various RBI, SEBI, and other committees, latest being the Sunil Mehta Committee on Resolution of Stressed Assets. Mr. Venkat holds a bachelor's in science and is also a postgraduate PGDJ from Bhavans Institute and is also a certified member of the Indian Institute of Bankers. So, a warm welcome to you, Mr. Nageshwar. Yeah. Now I'll introduce the next speaker, Mr. Ramesh, who is the Deputy Managing Director of India Exim Bank. A warm welcome to you, sir. Mr. Ramesh is Deputy Managing Director with India Exim Bank and is an officer from the Indian Telecom Service of the 1999 batch. Prior to his appointment at India Exim Bank, he served as Executive Director in National Agriculture Cooperative Marketing Federation of India Limited. He served as the Director in Department of Commerce, Government of India from 2016 to 2019, where he oversaw agriculture, export inspection, biotechnology, plantation divisions. Shri Ramesh worked as Director of Marketing at Marine Products Export Promotion Marine Products Export Development Authority, what we call it as MEPIDA, under Ministry of Commerce and Industry from 2010 to 2016. He has worked in the Department of Telecom and enforcement of licensing conditions and all regulations on all telecom service providers in the BPO industry. He has also worked with BSNL on development of mobile networks and infrastructure. Shri Ramesh has a bachelor's in engineering in electronics and communication from Bangalore University and is also a postgraduate in public policy and management from the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Welcome, sir. Warm welcome to you, sir. Now I'll introduce the third panelist, Mr. Ajay Srivastav. Mr. Ajay is a front-ranking civil servant. He is an additional Director General of Foreign Trade under the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. A front-ranking civil servant with a wide experience and knowledge in varied domains, especially WTO, FTA negotiations, trade policy, trade promotions, GST, government, IT systems, etc. Mr. Ajay is serving as an additional DGFT from November 2017 onwards, and he has published books on trade and also writes in Times of India, Business Lines, etc. He holds a master's in business administration focused on marketing and leadership from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. A warm welcome to you also, sir. Professor Dr. K. Rangarajan, Professor and Head, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Calcutta campus, and also is the head of the Center for MSME Studies of IAFT. He has a doctorate in management and holds masters in commerce with management and specialization, and holds a university rank in masters. He has undergone training in Virginia Polytechnic Institute, State University US, World Bank Institute, Canadian Consortium Management Schools, etc. A professor in the strategic management and business planning area, he has interest in organizational restructuring, cluster development strategies, state enterprises, and allied areas. He is in the realm of international business, serving more than 25 years through teaching, consulting, research, academic administration, which includes 4 years of industry experience at middle level in MNC, 3 years in overseas university. He has widely traveled, including in UK, US, Asia Pacific, on various academic assignments. He has lectured in strategic issues in industry on various national, international forums and associations. He has been a faculty for a number of MDP programs conducted for the policymakers and the industry. And he has also implemented a 3-year international project for Swiss Development Corporation in Southeast Asia and also in South-South Cooperation. He has conducted a research study entitled Implications of EU and US GSP Rules of Origin on the Exports of Indian Textiles and Clothing Industry for the Commonwealth Secretariat, UK. He has coordinated with the SME at various levels on strategic issues. He writes regularly in issues regarding the sector in national dailies as well as in referred journals. He has served as national expert for UNIDO Australia and their innovation in textiles industry projects. He served as a national expert in the evaluation commissions for UNIDO as well. Professor is serving in the boards of companies and is a member in various industry associations like CAA, FICCI, Academy of International Business, and also advises government, export promotion councils, commodity boards, and many policy-related issues concerning exports. A very, very warm welcome to you, Professor Rangarajan. So we have a very, very esteemed panelist, as you would have noticed. And now over to our director, Mr. Saroj Kumar, sir, to welcome all the panelists, esteemed panelists, and also the delegates. We have a huge participation who have logged in today. Majorly, as we know that this particular program, we wanted to pitch with exporters community as well as whoever was, sort of engaged in the exporting chain, be it bankers, be it policy analysts, all of them. We have about nearly 100 participants who have logged in. Maybe some more will keep on joining as well. Over to you, Mr. Saroj Kumar, for a formal welcome to the.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
And the first outset, it's really an honor, an immense pleasure, and furthermore an opportunity for State Bank Institute of Leadership to have the eminent panelist. And here the distinguished panelist, respected C. Venkat Nageshwar, our DMD IBG, Mr. N. Ramesh, DMD, Indian Exim Bank, Mr. A. Sajay Srivastava, additional DGFT, Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. Regarding Professor K. Rangarajan, Professor and Head, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Again, he is the second time he has graced this occasion. Earlier, along with our MD, he had been there for our MSME rejuvenation strategy. Sir, welcome, sir. It is such a privilege, such an eminent panelist are there. I'm not going to take much time. But since this is an opportunity where I can share and I can share with everyone, this also gives a lot of what sort of impetus. And for the first time, we have from SBIA, SBIL, and Indian Exim Bank, we all combine together to take this panel discussion forward. So we welcome all the participants. This is a warm welcome from SBIL. This kind of virtual panel discussion time and again as well has come in a different platform. And as we have shared, it is like a 360 degrees on different relevant topic with eminent personality. Time and again we have come back to and we have placed before all the participants. In this regard, before I coming forward to the topic, one thing I'd like to share about my institute. Our institute is is that precisely State Bank has thought in a different manner so far as the training parallels is concerned. For the first time, when in 2017, State Bank Institute of Leadership has been formulated by the competent authority. They thought, they visualized the vision in a different perspective. The main idea behind this is to create this premier ATI for academic excellence and to take forward whatever the domain in BFSI sector. And furthermore, it has not confined to only SBI. They have ensured that it should groom the leaders in BFSI sector across the globe. Apart from this pandemic, previous years, we have had the interaction with foreign delegates from Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and this has also gone on. But this COVID, obviously, it has put certain, what should I say, there are trying times. But during that time also, we have created a situation. SBL has connected with n number of issues, with n number of personalities, and with relevant issues and relevant themes also. For the first time, we are going to place before you, sir. We have had nearly 70 virtual programs. Out of that, 24 which we have put it in live stream. Now also this program is also being put in Facebook also. We have got a viewership of 6.22 lakhs as on date. So the kind of relevance we have come before this is immense, and we have always tried to engage this. In this regard, our entire team has come back very strongly, and we have visualized a program called as Beyond Boundaries. There is an international lecture series also. There is some impact series. So many areas we have touched upon during this COVID, we have tried to be relevant. So this is where we are now with this theme of India's export preparedness and competitiveness in the reconfiguring global value chain. This is definitely one of the most important and relevant topic. And here, one thing I can share with this, after this deliberation, definitely there will be so many takeaways for all the participants to be there. So far as this specific topic is concerned, one thing I can tell you, the whole world is now rushing towards globalization and integration. India has started late, but India is also not leaving any stone unturned how to take it forward. In this regard, if I'm going to place before that, the EXIM policy of 92-97 has made a huge difference so far as it has made a significant step so far as to take forward or protectionism or regulate the policy in such a manner so that the export can also be taken in a front stage, and how the import we are going to take over from the present to the balance of trade to the next level. Furthermore, after this Niti Aayog in 2020, when they have come out with the export preparedness index, for the first time they have come out with the policies of 4 policy and 11 4 pillars and 11 sub-pillars themes. Obviously, this is going to come out when you deliberate upon. But the challenges what they have faced is 3 challenges which surmount or which has really reflected. One is the inter-regional disparity so far as the export infrastructure is concerned. Second is the poor trade support and growth orientation among states. And third is the poor R&D infrastructure to promote complex and unique export. Because these are the 3 features which India has found, these are the certain vulnerability which has to be overcome. Because certain Asian countries like South Korea, Taiwan, they made a difference. Even if as per the WTO parlance, they are more like a developed countries. But here, these are the 3 basic factors have made us vulnerable. But surmounting to this COVID, the disruption of global value chain, definitely it has come into a halt so far as a 5 trillion economy, which has been envisaged by our Prime Minister. All these things has come into being a common man, being an audience. We are going to listen from all the eminent personality and we'll take it forward. Thank you very much, sir. Again, we have placed before you our deep appreciation that you have given your valuable time and you are on our SBL platform. Thank you very much, sir. Over to Kishan Kumar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saroj Kumar, for your wonderful exposition and also for the invite for all the distinguished delegates. Now, I mean, as for the time, we are right on dot. The agenda served says that 3:45 will start a panel discussion. So we are right on 3:45. So let me kick off the panel discussion in the theme of India's export preparedness and competitiveness in the reconfiguring global value chains. Maybe I'd want to start with Mr. Ajay Srivastav. So over to you, Mr. Srivastav. We all know that global trade, in percentage of GDP terms, about 60% of trade is supposed to be global trade. And the trade winds are blowing heavily, and the groupings are getting realigned. The geopolitical reasons are are at a very heightened level, and these are obviously being played out during a pandemic time, unfortunately, and all this has had huge impact in the last 1 year or so. And it is during this 1 year that India also had to play a lot of strategic stakes. India was not part of our CEPs. We came out of it. Obviously, that would have had some impact on our trade leanings with other countries. The supply chains are getting realigned. There are still a lot of dependencies we see when things resumed, or at least partially resumed. Now, coming to the crux of the issue of, when you are talking about resumption of, the economic thing clawing back, we still feel that a lot of dependencies are there, be it China or be it, any of those countries where India is dependent in terms of raw materials or, intermediates and things like that. In such a scenario, what is your opinion about the export competitiveness, and where does export competitiveness come from India in such a complex kind of a situation? Over to you, Mr. Ajay.
Hi, thanks, and thank you for having me here.
Thank
Happy
you.
to participate.
Thank you.
First, I would like to say that when we talk about the global value chains, it's not wrong to have dependencies on the supply chain. When 70% of the world trade is happening through the supply chains, we will have dependencies. What is wrong, of course, is that we should not have overtly critical dependencies on some critical products on one or two countries. So if we are sourcing 90% of an item from one country, then of course it's critically dependent and we should avoid that. Otherwise, trade and manufacturing today is all about supply chain dependencies. So we love that. We will be more opening our economy to be more actively participating. So first point is that supply chain dependencies, they are not bad. Critical dependence on a particular country is bad. So you will see a lot of initiatives from the government side for reducing those dependencies. So on pharma side, on electronic side, many programs are there like PLI for reducing those dependencies. Firm level firm programs are there. Now, coming to the second part of your question, we talked about where from our export competitiveness comes from. Since our exports, about more than 70% of our exports are coming from the manufacturing side. So, and manufacturing competitiveness essentially is a complex function of technology and expertise, labor expertise. So, sectoral inputs are very important here. For example, our auto sector expertise may flow from some technology requirement and the expertise on R&D front. Same with pharmaceuticals. On textiles or gems and jewelry, it's flowing from highly skilled labor. Same we can say for handicrafts. So it's sector specific. But the bottom line currently, the way competitiveness is changing is because of the technology infusion. Industry 4 technologies are changing the way forward. I'll stop here and then we'll answer your next question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So I would want to transport this to the next question to Mr. Ramesh of India Exim Bank, and sir, we were discussing regarding the value chains, and the global value chains are obviously, as we were discussing, is supposed to be shifting, post COVID. there are high stakes competition among countries in ASEAN or Southeast Asia and everywhere. As an kind of an initial observation from Apex Export Import Bank's point of view, how do you see this global value chain stakes playing out, sir? And how India ranking up in these whole stakes?
Yeah, I think it has started before pre-COVID times, and I think the COVID times had kind of accelerated this, realignment in global value chains. Basically, I would say the trigger point was the Trump era administration, where there was a need for, bringing down the reliance on a particular country, and then, kind of not be overly reliant on a certain country for one particular sector. In fact, this was even far before realized, at least in the case of rare earth minerals. I think if you can recall, somewhere in 2010, the Senkaku Island, episode where China and Japan were at loggerheads, and China one fine day stopped all the most important rare earth minerals required for the manufacture of semiconductors, which Japan is quite known for. So then Japan has to come down and then make amends and restart that particular business. I think from there on, these things picked up, and the requirement, the global value chains in per se had kind of been in continuous shift. So, of course, the disturbances with respect to the supply chain has definitely made every global company, any MNC, true to its name, to kind of reposition their value chain, supply chain, and then redistribute it into different geographies. I think in this whole episode, India should be the biggest gainer. I think that is demonstrated by the increased FDI even during the COVID times. And at least that has prompted a lot of policy response. That policy response is definitely picked up by the industry in a very positive way. And I think going forward, we can expect a different story altogether. And India may be a significant player in the whole global value chain.
Thank you. Thank you for your observation, sir. And I'll again come back to you. Before, I just want to make an announcement that if any of the participants who have logged in have got a question, please, we have a chat box there. So you can put your questions in that. I have already factored in all the questions which you had put to the panelists during the registration time. So I'll be taking the questions up with the panelists. Now to continue our discussion, and I also want all the other participants to mute the mic as well as audio and video, and so that we don't have any bandwidth issues other than the speakers. Thank you. And we'll continue our discussion. Before coming to our I would want to go to Mr. Nageshwar, so I thought maybe I'll take the immediate next question to Professor Rangarajan, and then I'll come back to you, sir. Professor Rangarajan, I just want to know that we all know that India's export basket in terms of how it was and what was now, say, 10 years back and now. There hasn't been much of great changes, and but how to make this particular export basket of India a broad-based one, in terms of value, or in terms of the kind of the reconfiguring value, global value chains, they need to reflect in our export basket also. So, but that isn't happening. Your initial remarks as to how we can perhaps catch on that.
Yeah. Thanks to you for inviting me for this esteemed panel. And it's a great opportunity to share some of my thoughts. Of course, I get a good platform to share some of my thoughts, which may be triggering, since the policymakers are also there, the practitioners are also there. That may trigger some kind of ideas to them for converting some of the thought process of a researcher towards action. Now, let me come into the first. Let me look at the global value chain, the much talked about global value chain and its reconfiguration, which is happening, etc. Then I'll come to the export basket as to how things can become made more elastic. See, if you look into the global value chain, mainly it is more and more controlled by the MNEs and select industries, right? See, that is how it is. Now, as far as India's participation in that, again, we may not be able to immediately compare the way in which my other competitors of South and Southeast Asia are doing and how I am doing as India. Because our participation, for example, I was just getting into some statistics of, let us take one of the important industry, which is automobile industry. And also, I was just thinking whether this pandemic is going to create much of a havoc for India. Right. I am just giving some basic statistics of automobile industry and leading players. See, if you look at a player like BMW, it has around 4,500 suppliers, produces production locations in 50 countries, and suppliers account for 70% of value added. Right? That is one. On the other side, you have Tesla, which is the new emerging kind of an auto giant. They have only 300 suppliers, especially for the Model S. And their production is very few countries. I hope India will also be sooner. It is becoming one of the locations for Tesla for production. I think they are trying to locate in Bangalore. And very few key suppliers for them, especially because it is a digital car. It's more dependent upon batteries and the other key system parts of it. Whereas one of the other leaders, Toyota, it has production location in around 28 countries, and similar like BMW, 65% of their value add is controlled by the suppliers. See, I'm just giving the tip of the iceberg. Now, let us look into automobile industry, global value chain. As I said, MNEs, they are the ones who are controlling it. Will they be able to go in for a reversal of whatever they are already doing? Because it's going to cost to the company. Am I right? The transaction cost will be really high. So the only way for them is to find out the easier ways by which I may be able to immediately suit myself to these kind of changing trends. In fact, I see an opportunity because see, if you look into India's participation in the global value chain, we are more of a forward participation in global value chain rather than a backward like what Vietnam and Bangladesh kind of people. They import and then they go for an export rather than, as you have rightly mentioned in the beginning itself, that we are into the raw materials and intermediate supplies, etc. An interesting thing what I have seen, because since you have asked about the elasticity part of our export baskets, it's going to create a great opportunity for India because the latest report of the World Investment Report, it talks about the reconfiguration in global value chain in three aspects. One, see, the most talked about outsourcing is going to become insourcing regionally. And India being in the forward part of it, we have an opportunity rather than a Vietnam or a Bangladesh, and thanks to China for creating much kind of tensions also. Right. And similarly, instead of offshoring, they are talking about reshoring. This is what is going to happen. So when the reshoring is happening, the regional production capacities may be started building. See, on the one side, firms, the MNEs try to diversify their risk and also look at certain safe regional pockets. And definitely with the kind of our diplomacy, the kind of things, whatever we have done during COVID, I think in the regional safety part of it, India has a huge role to play. And thanks to the kind of diplomatic relations what we are building in the multilateral organizations, probably we have a good role to play. And similarly, when it comes to production, it is going to be more towards rebundling rather than unbundling, especially because of the technology, what you have said, the more movement towards digitalization and more implications of those digitalization in the form of 3D production and then robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. See, in fact, those things have given, like what Mr. Ajay Srivastava was saying, see, the manufacturing part of it, when we are talking about broad basing the export basket, I find especially the information technology and financial services are going to have a huge kind of an opportunity in enabling this kind of a production change in the GDC. See, that is going to create a lot of opportunity. Of course, as we always say that I think initially you have also remarked that the kind of infrastructure what is required for that, for adapting ourselves to these kind of changes, is going to be really important. Probably, I think the government through, like you have mentioned, Atmanirbhar, the production incentive, linking production to incentivization of production, etc. These are going to be an impetus. If these things go in the right direction, probably we have a lot of things to do. So, at the end of it, what I mean to say is, yes, the production basket is going to go for a change. The traditional products may not be there unless otherwise we make it as a neo-traditional product, because it is not about only a garment. It is more about already in the domestic market also it has already come. Health-friendly garments have started getting in, and Europeans are more conscious about these kind of health-friendly things nowadays. So naturally, you'll find instead of a traditional product garment, it is going to be moving towards further value addition, and that is where I think it holds opportunities. Yeah, with this, I think the initial remarks, I'll get into some more kind of this thing. I don't want to become more of a researcher and an academician. Let me try to give it into some kind of practical insights.
Absolutely, Ravi.
Thank you.
So thanks for triggering our minds, and I'll come back to you, sir. Times that many of our exporters had a lot of difficulty in terms of liquidity, a lot of working capital issues, working capital banks, I would say, and there was also a lot of stimulus packages which government has come out with to somehow save the day for them, and this largely believed that the position has improved. Could you put more light on it, sir? How much of, say, possibly our portfolio which has availed the moratorium benefits and so on and so forth? Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krishna Kumar. First of all, thanks to SBI Institute, Leadership Institute, and Exim Bank for making me part of this important panel discussion. Yes. One of the before I jump into the answering to your question, let me look at there is this a distinct opinion being formed, thinking that the entire value chain is going to be shifted from China. The whole other parts of the world are going to get the advantage of it. Two things I would like to tell. One, of course, the data that has come recently, if you look at, we find there are very few countries where there is a positive growth in the exports. Vietnam, of course, what Dr. Rangarajan was talking about, we've seen a small growth there. But China has shown a growth of 3%. And second important point, the other day I was interacting with the Indian ambassador to China. We had an interaction with him and we're talking about various other things. One of the important points he had mentioned was that not a single institute from the time that we're talking about Trump or talking about the disputes have closed the shop in China and moved out of it. Everyone still exists there. The value chain, despite the fact that we are all talking about there's going to be a huge shift from China to other parts of the world, it's not all that easy. Looking at the scale at which China has built it, looking at the pace at which the price at which they provide, it's difficult. So we need to look at what are the areas that we can concentrate upon. I know Dr. Rangarajan would definitely be talking about it. He's a learned scholar and he would be the right person to talk about it. But for me, we need to look at what are my strengths. And I need to focus on those strengths to improve or take the advantage of the global disruption that may happen. Unless we focus on a strength, if you try to put your eggs in all the baskets, and in one basket you try to do everything for everyone, it might be difficult. So we need to focus on the specific strengths. Having said this, Dr. Kumar, when you asked me about the question about our preparedness, this is when the COVID struck, as heading the International Banking Group, one of the biggest challenges that I had, which I never thought of, We said that exports can become a challenge. Movement of goods will become a challenge. That's one part of it. But you know what? One of the surprising things that happened was my own branches started calling me. They said that we have received the documents at my branch. I'm talking about my branches in Singapore, Hong Kong, Sydney, other centers. They said that we received the documents for the customer, but we are unable to dispatch them to India for them to discount those bills and dispatch them to India. We couldn't imagine, there were many problems, but we couldn't imagine these type of problems. It's not just the movement of goods, movement of documents, everything had been affected. And on account of this, yes, the exporters had liquidity challenges, which you rightly mentioned. And one of the things that State Bank of India has done, we were very, very proactively for the first bank to introduce the COVID emergency credit line, much before the RBI or Government of India had taken the steps. SBI was the first bank to introduce this and offered liquidity to all our corporates, all our businessmen, which includes traders. And subsequently, of course, as we all know, the measures which Reserve Bank of India had taken out of the box, it's not just conventional. Unconventional measures have been taken by RBI and Government of India to pump in huge amount of liquidity into the markets, which had helped the exporters ensure that the exporters, or for that matter, all the businessmen would not find problem with the liquidity. While other challenges are there, which we can discuss later in the panel discussion, but the first and foremost challenge of the liquidity has been addressed, first by SBI, but next by the RBI and the Government of India. And together they have ensured that the liquidity is provided to these people, and the growth that is seen, that we are seeing right now as we witness, is come back to near pre-COVID levels. So things have improved, and I'm sure that things will further improve there. So I'll stop here and take your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nageshwar. I'll come back to you with more questions as we progress our discussion. I'll again take the discussion back to Mr. Ajay Srivastava. Mr. Ajay, what we were discussing, now that some more clarity is coming into our discussion, I thought that maybe, if you could highlight the progressive steps taken by the government, in somehow getting back into the realignments of the global value chains. And if you were to put these things in perspective, including all those production-linked incentive schemes and so on and so forth, can you exemplify what are the measures that government has taken in this direction, sir? I think you need to unmute, sir.
Thanks. I'll try to build upon what Professor Rangarajan has said. So one thing is, the unique thing about the GVC production is that you need not master the entire product. You can choose a part of the product. Absolutely. So that's one. So even if our share in the manufacturing of complex product is less, we can still try for it. That's number one. Number two, if I put in the total perspective at the national level, then our share of Indian exports in the global merchandise trade is 1.7%. But share of the products which are manufactured in the GVC is less than 0.7%. That means we recognize that we have a lot of things to do. And we also have examples of countries like Vietnam and many more who are offering incentives, signing many FTAs to attract the MNCs. So Government of India has it has taken very active steps and has a very active program to support the production of these items which are useful for the GVC, our participant in the GVC. So the first is, most of the countries which want to attract the MNCs, they have to lower their corporate tax. So we have lowered our corporate tax rates 2 years back. Then Few months back, you must have read that 29 labor laws have been compressed into just 4 labor codes.
Sure.
So the impact, say, if I talk about only one impact, so the companies which have workers up to 300, they need not approach the government before hire or fire decisions and many other decisions. Then third is, of course, you said, is the PLI scheme. So PLI scheme, if you notice the details, most products, I'll say, except for one or two, most products, they are the products which have gained dominance in the GVC production world over. Take from advanced chemistry cell battery to auto components to advanced machinery, most these products. So we have a definite plan. And you must have read that PLI incentives, they are not available across the board. So we want to create some global champions. We want to select certain anchor firms from leading manufacturers from other countries, leading Indian firms. It will be an eclectic mix of very few number of firms, on which government and the country will be waiting for its for increase in production of these products and participation in the value chain. If you ask me what else should be done, then you must have noticed that our rank in the EODB rank has improved in the past 4 years. Now we are at 63. Our rank has increased in trading across borders, which relates to exports, imports. So if you want what more can be done, I say export and import process should be made, exit from the port and custom cluster should be very fast. Any delay at the port and customs, it derails the value chain in the subsequent countries. So here we have worked a bit. We need to work a lot on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ajay, and putting more clarity on that, especially the element of port modernization and the turnaround time improvements that are required, which we have highlighted. I'll come back to Mr. Ramesh, to take these discussions forward slightly more into granular detail of the products per se. We all know that semiconductors are core to every field today, be it agriculture or automobile. There has been a lot of reports of late that many automobile manufacturers have huge orders pending, but since they don't have enough semiconductors, we all know that today even a flow of petrol is actually controlled by a semiconductor, not any mechanized devices. That being so, the importance of semiconductor is coming to the fore, and our dependencies on the Chinese or a Taiwanese kind of dependency is still very much still there. The moment many of these restrictions on COVID got lifted, we immediately saw that it got all resumed quickly. Whether it is the pharma industry going for APIs or semiconductor industries fatafat going for same kind of imports from China, Taiwan, and things like that. So the dependencies are very much there, and there is no great fab ecosystem that India could develop quickly, as earlier we were pointing out regarding the cost and scale aspect also need to be factored in this, isn't it? So looking at all this, how do you see this particular dependencies? How can we tackle this to become competitive? And your take on that, and what Exim Bank has researched on it. I know that there has been a lot of work you've been putting up, including on electronics export and things like that. So, if you could share your perspective on that, sir.
Thank you. This semiconductor industry, what we say quite technically as electronics system design and manufacturing sector, the ESDM sector. I think this is where we had lagged quite a lot behind China. Of course, the whole world was almost completely dependent on China or the Chinese ecosystem, the China plus Taiwan. And to some extent, Korea had been a leading player in this, but of course, the GVCs were so interlinked with China. Practically, there is no electronic product as of now which is not having a Chinese component in that. Of course, India is not an outlier in this. We import so much of electronics items. In fact, if I had to put a specific number, in 2010-11, it was around 20 billion imports were being done. And then now, the previous year, it was around $41 billion. So this particular, gap or, the imports on ESDM sector is growing quite continuously. I think the government of India started realizing on this front, and then the first trigger on the so-called the pilot PLI started with the mobile phone manufacturing. Of course, after China, we are the second largest mobile phone market. So, and we were growing at quite a rapid pace. And our homegrown brands were really, had completely lost out on a certain point of time. So there the PLI scheme came in. And then now today, after nearly 2.5, 3 years, we are talking of Apple iPhone 12 going to be manufactured in India. In fact, in one of my meetings with the Joint Secretary who looks after this particular PLI scheme and the electronic sectors in the Ministry of Electronics and IT, the grander plan is to have the next iPhone, the coming iPhones, if not 13, maybe 14, being assembled in India. When I say assembled, the culmination of global value chains fructifying, and then this flagship product being shipped out from India. Why that is more important? Any new model of, say, iPhone brings in its 60 to 70% of sale within 3 to 4 months of its launch. To that extent, and each iPhone launch would be valued at not talking of only one single product in the whole ESDM, portfolio. So I think the PLI has been a grander success, at least to the mobile phone segment. Now that particular model has been copied to almost every practically implementable sectors across product ranges, be it pharma, ACC, all other sectors. So now that's one good, an experiment which has gone very right and has shown some measurable results. Of course, we had the SPECS scheme also of Government of India, scheme for promotion of manufacturing of electronic components and semiconductors. Basically, the policy solution has been to not only to provide incentives at the product level, but also to come down up to the subcomponent levels. Okay. Apart from subcomponent levels, again, the sourcing requirements, say for the public procurement, which itself is a larger customer when you put all the government entities purchase. So that itself putting it in a kind of an entry barrier for any other companies to any other sources to come into this play. So there they had tweaked around the public procurement policies. I think those efforts are being taken. This direct benefits apart, there are a lot of incentives provided from the state governments. Individual state government is vying for each of this business. I think that is the best thing to happen in this whole exercise, that the state competitiveness to support any kind of industries had really gone improved. Apart from direct benefits, say like stamp duty or foregoing of certain taxes, they had started creating ecosystem so that the companies come and set up plants in the countries. Of course, a few of the southern states have really taken lead on that front. Now, you have also touched upon the fab ecosystem. Of course, with such a user base and then huge potential, we have been able to attract any investment in the fabrication of semiconductor wafers. I think it's a very tricky business in the sense the obsolescence part is so high and the technological development required is so huge. I think something developed prior to 5, 6 years or 10 years is being fructifying into a commercial production. That's the level of advanced science required, and the obsolescence factor is also quite well known. So to that extent, government of India has now come out with another scheme that it has issued an expression of interest in January 5th, 2021, saying that industry may bring in any kind of partnerships to establish fab industry in India, or if you would like to even acquire some existing assets abroad, that also can be thought of. So I think on a policy front, these things are being well addressed. Of course, these things cannot be done in single go, and then we cannot be replacing the number one player in maybe a foreseeable future. So that's a tall order. But the beginning has been very good and encouraging, promising. Going forward, I think there will be a good number of players coming into India as, say, the second most valued supplier or so. Here again, the issues of, apart from the ecosystem part, the financing part is also very important. I think there is a larger thought on government of India side also to how to come and provide a competitive rates to the industry. One thing on the input costs, second thing on the financial costs, and then on the export front also how it can be moderated within the available WTO system of incentives. So there are solutions being worked out on multiple levels, and we have a template at hand. I believe going forward, we will be able to see a good progress in this front.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ramesh, for an exhaustive response on that. And I'll take the next question to Mr. Rangarajan. Especially, it's in a related theme. As we all know that, due to the various constraints that has been pointed out by the earlier speakers, including Mr. Ramesh just now, many industries and exporters, as we all know, are reeling under the raw material constraint, the input constraint. The alternative supply chains are, though wishfully fine, are not working out when it comes to the economics or the scale part of it. And it's also true that the dependency is very much there, and it is not possible to build it, change it overnight. Coming to the larger aspect of how we will be able to address it, at least in the longer time frame, it is also true that in aspects like pharma industry or even in electronics, initially the government of India had a lot of electronics has been identified as a big sector. There was a lot of impetus given to that, about the Keltrons and Uptrons of the world doing the rounds, and of course, obsolescence factor, what Mr. Ramesh said, is very much relevant here as well. Similarly, in the pharma front, though we talk about APIs, again, the dependency on China, and there is no alternative to it. Fact also remains that we have closed all our big PSUs of the IDPLs and things like that, which was at least to some extent manufacturing some of the APIs. May not be the entire palette that is required for the pharma industry as of now. So, how do you see this whole thing? And where is the respite for us to start, and where do we start, and how do we build that competency and capability? Sir, you have to unmute yourself, sir. I think you're muted.
Yeah. See, of course, you have rightly pointed out, it is very difficult to re-energize the kind of ecosystem with which we proceeded when it comes to electronics as well as pharma. In fact, if I just get into the evolution of this industry, and at one point of time, we were just creating a lot of, I would say, plays in the international markets also, mainly because the ecosystem was clearly built. Now again, I think we are trying to come back to that, thanks that whether it is focusing on manufacturing and trying to, there are a lot of factors. See, in fact, when you go on committing sins, at one point of time, you have to pay for it. Right. So I think that is really holding good. See, unfortunately, what is the constraint for India? When you look back, unfortunately, all those industries which we are talking about, they are highly now internationalized. That is the major problem. See, I was just looking into, suppose if you say internationalization of an industry is 100%, electronics is on the top with more than 80% score. So now, if I try to have my full value chain in India and then try to come out with that, etc., cost competitiveness is really going to be difficult. Right, that is one. Having said that, I'm not saying that we may not be able to get out of this situation. I'm just looking into that. The electronics, machinery and equipment, textiles and apparel, automotive, extractive industry, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, all have more than 50% score in internationalization today. So that means it is already well spread. So whoever is more and more cost effective, they are going to do that. So probably, I think again we have to go back to the strengthening of this basic ecosystem. In fact, I had an interesting kind of interaction also during some of my studies in sports goods. Okay. Right, at one point of time, we were one of the major exporters of a lot of things: cricket bats, and then balls and footballs, etc. So when I was in some of the clusters, I just asked them about, now what do you do? They said, sir, we are slowly shifting to trading rather than manufacturing. Why? Because, sir, now cricket bats are available in composite material. There is no need for any willow to be imported. And then I make a bat and then ask Sachin to play with that or ask somebody else to play with that, etc. There are so much of composite material available. And the major suppliers are from South Korea and China, Thailand, etc. Okay, so now it is better to be a trader rather than a manufacturer. See, when you are looking for easy way out and quick money, you have to pay the price for that. In fact, even Pakistan has overtook us in football supplies to the World Cup. We lost the bid. India has lost the bid for football suppliers, though we are one of the best manufacturers. So probably, see, instead of finding fault with who has done wrong, what has gone wrong, etc., one of the things is, see, are we going back to address the basics? Like in banking, what always you people insist on, keeping your fundamentals strong, so that you can avoid any kind of a problem in your banking system. I think RBI, SEBI, SBI, everyone talks about the keeping fundamentals strong. I think it is the need of the hour for us. See, provided we have the will to do it, provided we may be able to attract the industry to again get into that ecosystem. You were talking about API. I still remember when Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh was into contract manufacturing, places like Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh used to be API manufacturers also. Right. Slowly and steadily, almost all the API units which were there near Madhya Pradesh, Indore, almost all vanished. And the same is the case in electronics. Every state government was having an electronic development corporation, and there are so many small little kind of assembly, this, that, everything was happening, almost everything gone bankrupt. Right. Overstaffed, almost closed. So probably, I think, see, this is where we were lost. In fact, we have to learn from both Vietnam as well as China. In fact, when I was doing a study in early 2000 about how China is making it possible with that kind of a cost competitiveness, etc., every incentive, today we are talking about smart incentives for a WTO. China was doing it even before access into WTO. See, every incentive in China is linked to productivity. In textiles, when I was talking to some of the manufacturers in China, they said we get an incentive based on how much we are contributing towards reducing the energy cost. A unit which can recycle water can get a power subsidy. A unit which is not going to, which is contributing to a bad water, is going to get a more kind of a tariff. That forces you to gain and make profits also. You are contributing to the nation and contributing to your own unit. Unless otherwise, in fact, instead of production linked, I would say it should be more productivity linked. Unless otherwise it is productivity linked, especially in the labor intensive sectors like electronics and pharma, etc. And with this kind of a digitalization which is happening, wherein we are talking about artificial intelligence and robotics and 3D production, etc. in the shop floor, probably if we don't do it now, we can't do at any point of time. So probably we may be getting into one of the major issues. That is what I feel, probably which can help, rather than looking in for low hanging fruits. That is one major problem for India, what I see. We are always looking at the low-hanging fruits. Acha, chalo, now let us go for fruits, vegetables, food grains. Arey, come on. Why do you want to leave that the manufacturing part of it, where we had at least some kind of a say? Why now I have to go in for one more of food processing and then try to export it more? Because even the export indicators are not that great. See, on the other day, I was looking into rice exports. We used to talk about more of exporting our Indian rice to Middle East and then the basmati and this and that. And suddenly you find there are a lot of African countries which are importing Indian rice. Senegal is one of the top importers. So probably I think we should be able to sense these things. All the food grains, etc., as the World Trade Statistics is also talking about. They are talking about two important things in the future to rule the exports, the international business. One is the technology and technology-driven products, and the other is the food products. There is no doubt about it. Food products to apne paas hai hi hai. Anytime we may be able to take advantage of it, but we should not lose our focus on manufacturing, because manufacturing is going to help us strengthen further in both agriculture as well as in services. If we are not going to focus on that, at least with these new schemes, etc., and the push on infrastructure and R&D, which is now being pushed, we should be able to, the industry should be able to take advantage of it rather than looking for quick gains. And direct subsidies, that is one of the major issues. See, people always feel that, okay, the government gives something, so I add it to my bottom line. You should look at how the incentives given by the government can add to your top line rather than looking at bottom line. So you earn 6 rupees profit and the incentive is added 6 rupees and you are saying your profit is 12 rupees. This is absurd. Anyhow, that is what is my take on that.
Thank you, brother. For putting it in the full length perspective. Thank you. I'll take the question back to Mr. Nageshwar. Sir, talking competitiveness, we talked about the technology element in it and so on. It is also true that exports competitiveness has to equally do with the exchange rates. You know that many exporters make a lot of money in playing with the arbitrariness of the currencies in which they are dealing, and especially the emerging market context. But we also know that with the financialization that has happened, post COVID, the kind of printing of notes that has gone on or still going on, and the hardening of the U.S. Treasury yields and things like that. The world it has become such a spate of money everywhere that the exporter is jammed there also. He is unable to predict anything on the exchange rates or the volatility part of it in the exchange rates when he is dealing in the international markets. The dynamics of the exchange rates are not in his favor. Being both the markets man and as well as the trade finance man, what is your perspective, sir? How is it likely to pan out, especially what is the way by which the exporters can guard against this kind of a scenario? And I don't see anything, any respite coming in the way things are going.
One of the things that I keep telling my people when I interact with both the exchange rates and all on a lighter vein is that if the rupee doesn't depreciate, it will appreciate. But having said that, let me tell you, we keep interacting with all the exporters, and during the current pandemic, while when the markets are stable, one of the things that people normally do when the markets are stable, there would be leading exports and lagging imports. Means essentially what happens is people book forward contracts because they think that the markets are going to remain stable and let me take the advantage of the forward premium. So the forward premium adds to your the spot trade, and if the rupee remains stable, I get the advantage of the forward premium. So that's what we call as leading exports and lagging imports. So people normally try, as you rightly said, try to play in the markets and try to take advantage of the volatility in the currencies. But to my experience, in these markets, right from the times I was working on it from 96 onwards, when I was a dealer, I find that no one's views are absolutely correct. No one can predict the way in which the markets would move. So the best thing for any trader, which we always are an exporter, is not to take positions based on the views, but take the positions based on your underlying trade transaction. If you have a trade transaction, if you booked it, and if you've done your pricing properly, just hedge yourself and do your manufacturing or trading activity. Do not unnecessarily try to predict the way in which currencies are moving. So that should be the cardinal principle for any of the exporters, rather than trying to say that the currency is volatile, what should I do? While it is easy to say that China had advantage, because I remember the way in which renminbi is stable, and one of the advantages of these people is they would not bother about the currency movement. They focus on the manufacturing. The same thing should be done by our exporters as well. But the pandemic had created other problems, Mr. Krishna Kumar. Having people who have hedged themselves, having done the costing well, knew that this particular price is perfect for him, gone ahead and did everything. But those people also were affected, unfortunately, in these times, because orders were cancelled. And that was a time when right now, of course, there are a good amount of flows are there. But at that point of time, the liquidity got dried up. If I'm talking about March, I'm not talking about subsequent months. And rupee started depreciating. On top of it, people have lost, those exports got cancelled. They could not discount the bills. And they had to cancel those forward contracts, resulting in losses on account of cancelling or buying the dollars at a higher rate than at the rate at which they had sold the dollars. So it's a complex, multiple problems, multiple risks which our exporters face. There are products which would help these people to hedge themselves, like buying an option, an insurance product, which I exercise the option if it goes against me, but I sell it in the market rate if it doesn't go against me. That's an option. But again, there is a premium to be paid. If the premium can be absorbed, the best thing is go for an option. Otherwise, do your costing properly, do your hedging, and then focus on manufacturing rather than getting worried about the volatility in the currencies. This is the simple solution that we created, educating our exporters.
Thank you, Mr. Nageshwar. To put it in, like in cricket, we say that line and length is for the bowler is the in thing to be a good bowler. So you have to succinct terms you have to put it. Thank you. And coming back to Mr. Srivastav, Mr. Ajay, can you highlight, let us talk something about the agriculture sector. In fact, Professor Rangarajan has pointed out, now we all know that during the pandemic, in fact, it is the green shoots of the agriculture sector that was, to some extent was a savior. Otherwise, we would have even gone to a level of, having a big, shortfall in food grains production and so on. But it's also true that, though coming to commodities, India is somewhere there in the top 3 in most of the commodities, but still we are not a major player when it comes to either our, food products or even in many of those commodities. So, where does, so much of clusters, we are talking about so much of capacities, even the budgets as, earmarked a lot of spending on that, including on the infrastructure related to agriculture at all. Where do we, how is it likely that the agriculture competitiveness is possible when it comes to exports?
Thanks. So I'll say that agriculture exports is no more that you get an order, you go to a mandi, buy something and export it. Nobody is going to accept that.
Okay.
So they want full traceability, and I think we are working on certain products for grapes, pomegranates, some fruits and vegetables. In some cases for rice, or for milk in certain pockets. But mostly this work remains a work in progress. But since Mr. Ramesh is here, he's an expert on this. May I invite him to answer this question more fully? Ramesh, please.
Yeah. Please, sir. Please,
Sir.
Ramesh. I also know that he has worked with MEPIDA and all. You can extend your dialogue to cover the allied ideas also. Please, sir.
Thank you, Ajay sir. Sir is my guru also in Department of Commerce. Few clarifications on the agriculture exports. Of course, we are doing great in many of the sectors. If you take agriculture as a whole, what we say as chapter 1 to 24, which is in the HSN spectrum, we have around 1.1 trillion exports worldwide. We have a very small share of it, about 38 to 40 billion dollars. This highest was around 42 or 43 billion dollars in the commodity boom of 2013. So later we have been kind of range bound in this 35 to 38 billion dollars. So where are we positioned? We are in somewhere in 8th to 10th position. Bulk of trade happens, of course, as an intra-EU trade. So rest, we are kind of positioned between Thailand, Malaysia, Canada, Australia, and all. So we are all more or less equally placed. So there can be a certain big jump which is possible to move up that from 8th or 9th position to say 3rd or 4th position. Now, where we can do good and where are we doing good? We are doing great on rice. Great on rice means, again, whatever controversies surrounding it, we export water and all. So we are the largest exporter of basmati inherently because we are the only people who can produce it. We are the largest exporter with respect to non-basmati rice also. Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia comes quite low on the priority. Then we are number 3 or 4 in marine export. It's around $7 billion. So the largest again is Europe. And then we are one of, I think, second largest in the meat products. I would only say buffalo meat. So there is a big particular market share available for us. If God forbid everything goes good, sugar also we are the number 1 player there. So there are pockets of, and spices, of course, we had retained number 1 position, $3 to $4 billion. So there are pockets of excellence amongst agriculture products. But where are we lagging is these are the raw intermediary products which we are exporting. The real value lies in the export of value-added products. And again, it is linked to today's topic on the global value chain. The value addition doesn't happen in a single country. Shrimps from India goes to Vietnam, where there is a better skills to make a nobashi or a butterfly shrimp, and then get exported to Thailand or to Japan. So there the end product is consumed. So either you can bring in the complete value chain into India or be a better partner in this whole process and then improve your percentage of value addition. So that is what is required. I think a conscious effort is going on that front with respect to agriculture infrastructure fund. I think this 1 lakh crore outlay is a very good attempt on that front, that wherever you require to add capacities, either in infrastructure, logistics, warehousing. So all these things are being given focus. And this agriculture export policy of Government of India, that is also laying focus on cluster-based approach. Wherever we have concentration of a certain production or a processing, so that need to be tuned towards or focused towards increasing exports. So we have not touched we are not a prominent player in grapes. Although we export quite a lot of it, we are not a prominent player in grapes. We are not even a prominent player in export of mango. Pakistan exports much more than that. Although we are the world's largest producer of mango, we are the world's largest producer of banana, but we export something like 70 million, whereas Philippines or Philippines or Guatemala export something like $3 to $4 billion. So you can see that particular gap which we can fill in. There are several. First, our focus had been to fulfill our needs and then export the surplus. I think we had to shift from that particular mode to see from how we produce our manufacture, our bake and make for the world. I think that emphasis is there. We have grown out of that surplus export mode. I think good times are going to come.
Thank you for the exhaustive replies. I'll again take the question back to Professor Rangarajan. Sir, talking about, you already touched upon the export incentive elements. And recently, that there has been a lot of issues about, now that we are in the GST regime, there has been a lot of violations of the export incentives and the way many exporters have used it. And I gather that itself has, has come as a big, stumbling block in, driving exports, and many of those incentivization not being very targeted one has also contributed to the so-called volatile export performance of the immediate past few months or so. Where is really the issues there? That is one. And I also want to know from you that, talking about you touched upon the lower hanging fruit earlier, compared to the manufacturing driven exports, which, as we find is the higher hanging fruit. The services led exports are supposed to be relatively lower hanging as far as India is concerned. So how do you see this thing panning out at least in the next 5 to 10 years? You have to unmute, sir, please.
Thank you for posing both the questions. Number one, see, as far as the GST, the export incentives and its misuse, etc., right? One of the thing is, of course, it has taken time for the industry to adapt to the kind of system which they have switched over to, and also the infrastructure which was there at that time, because the government was also trying to adapt itself to an infrastructure. So there was a lot of chaos. I still remember, I don't know whether when Mr. Ramesh or when Mr. Ajay was meeting some of the exporters, etc., I used to be there as a mute spectator, because most of the exporters used to come for a program just to ask them, sir, mera GST refund nahi aa raha hai. It was a typical question which used to be there. I used to feel, I don't have a place when these people are coming only to know whether the GST refund will come or not. Right. Of course, that now has reduced. Right. That has now reduced, because now even for most of the people who are implementing it also, the things were new. Okay. So now, since it has reduced, now we are able to understand who is trying to get away with over invoicing, under invoicing, etc. Otherwise, earlier even this was also not visible. Who is doing what is happening? Nothing was visible. So now, at least, yes, we are able to do that. And with the increased digitalization, what has been done by customs and the GST people, I think this will be tested. But yes, see, when it comes to incentives, there are two major problems. The time value of money as a banker, all of you know, right? See, when am I getting that incentive? That matters for me as a motivator. Suppose if I have applied for some incentive, okay, after 1.5 years, I am going to get an incentive. You look at the time value of money. Because of that, there are exporters who are not that much inclined towards incentive. They feel that, okay, our incentive mil gaya, to later I'll account for it. If not, no problem. That is one category of guys, right? Especially people who are in project exports and others, they are those guys. Because it is capital intensive, I won't be waiting for the incentive to come and all. That is one. The other category is those kind of people who are into a kind of a buyer's market rather than the seller's market. Like, let us take leather, textile products, etc. See, there the rate gets finalized. It is just like cattle trading. And first I go into that, okay, one piece is $4, fine. He says, okay. So then the documentations happen. So basically, the importer is trying to understand what kind of incentives are going to be there, whether it is GSP incentive or it is going to all those things. They try to take away, and you are agreeing on a final rate which is more useful to you. Now, in this process, that is where the duty drawback, etc., were more attractive for the exporters because they felt, acha, I can see the incentive here. Otherwise, I just sign documents, right? Otherwise, I don't know what is happening. So that is where the when I look into the incentives, of course, now some of those incentives what we were giving is not WTO compatible. Most of them now, I think, most of them are under litigation. Probably Mr. Ajay may be able to throw more light on it. That is where we are now trying to move towards a smart incentive, so that we don't get caught under WTO that there is a direct impact on it, right? So probably the smart incentive, again, when it comes to an incentive, if it is linked to the value chain, then the incentive will be really motivating to the exporter as well as to the country. If you are going in for at the end of the value chain before that goes into the market, that is where if I am going to incentivize, then probably the same chapter will continue. That is my take on the incentive part of it. And I think your second question is about what exactly is that? I've lost my other thing. The second additionality which you added beyond incentive, I think it is about the future things which you are
service led or manufacturing.
Yeah, manufacturing led, of course. See, as far as this is concerned, especially with the digitization which is happening, I was just looking into the services led and its impact on manufacturing.
Okay.
Right, let me put it in this way, rather than classifying it as a service led or a manufacturing led. See, for example, let us take digitization.
Okay.
Right, any firm which is involved into digitization, etc., will definitely contribute to the service kind of export, etc. Whether it is IoT, cloud, artificial intelligence, reality, and all those stuff. If you look at digitization, the industry impact is going to apply to all industries, irrespective of whether it is manufacturing or services. In fact, they talk about the market of this digitization service alone is going to double more than double in the coming 5 years. So your service-led part is getting into that. Now, how am I going to use that service? Going in for focusing on data and using them in servicification of manufacturing. Right, that is what, in fact, a new term which has come. They talk about servicification of manufacturing because of these kind of technologies which are coming.
True. Yes.
And especially when Mr. Ramesh was talking about food products, agricultural products, etc. They say the 3D printing, especially when shrimp processing and other things which are going to happen, they say that the 3D printing application to mainstream industries, which include food, pharmaceuticals, textiles, electronics, etc., has a potential future growth. Again, servicification into this area also. In fact, there is an estimate which says up till 2035, right? They say that it is going to grow more than 30% CAGR. 30% CAGR, 20 to 30% CAGR is expected on this. See, my only worry is whether my industry is prepared for that. Do I have the financial system which can support this kind of a transformation? Whether I have to see, because I'm more worried why I am raising this question. Today only I was reading the newspaper about the e-commerce policies again coming out. I know the first study which was done by us along with FICCI and all way back in 2004 about e-commerce, how to improve e-commerce exports from India. 2004. From that time, those issues which have been flagged are still continuing. a problem in coordinating, integrating this, that, etc. Yeah, when by the time China has already improved 10 times of their e-commerce exports. See, this is what I always say, that yes, how well we instead of talking about that in isolation, will we be able to integrate that, right? Because servicification of manufacturing is going to be an important thing in terms of automation, 3D printing, and digitalization. How well we are able to get into that. In that, anyhow, we have a strength in service, right? So when you go in for further servicification, your strength will increase. At the same time, the manufacturing will also increase. That sector will get boost. Let me give you some more statistics about industrial robots. They have tripled in 10 years. Right, especially logistical and medical robots. They have at least they are upgraded and getting tripled again between 2018 to 2021, especially with the COVID pandemic, etc. This has also happened. So you can now understand how the other countries are preparing, and they are also trying to ready for competing, etc. So probably that preparedness is also required. That is my call on that.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for the detailed response. Yeah, I'll talking digitalization. I just want to bring in Mr. Nageshwar into the discussion. We all know that the extent of digitalization that is going on in the post-pandemic world is quite high, and including in the BFSI sector. Or how is it likely? We are talking about, as the professor was telling, whether it is IoT or machine learning, and in finance per se, we talk about blockchains, how it can improve and contribute to our value chains in a huge way, including in trade finance and so on. There are a whole lot of, including SBI is working on many of those engines, credit related engines or trade finance related engines. We are trying to integrate many of the things with our app already. Much of it has come in, including the Kisan part of it, Forex part of it, and so on. So how do you see these things helping the exporters going forward?
See, one of the important things that happened because of the COVID, while of course we were moving towards digitalization, the pace at which the digitalization has happened has increased multifold. In fact, while we were talking, I just got a message from my colleague who said that he participated in a launch of bank guarantee issuance in Patna, I think. That's where he had participated, and he said that he had sent me a message. So the digitalization is something that is picked up at a very, very fast pace, and there is an increased acceptance of digital documents today. And there is a consensus has been built up to accept the e-bill of lading. There is a blockchain is being used for faster transactions and transparency. State Bank of India, in fact, we moved into blockchain technology for international transactions for the viewing at the moment, but we'll move towards the transactions and settlement at a later date, but we're also slowly started moving into that. AI and ML, we are using it for very extensively for sourcing, procurement, and demand forecasting also. That's something which we are doing it in our YONO app. We're extensively using it in order to ensure that we can source the application, we can procure it, and we can forecast whatever demand that is there. One important thing that we're doing again, Dr. Krishna Kumar, is we are centralizing our trade finance, entire trade finance.
Okay.
We are seeing to ensuring that it will be end-to-end process would be digitalized. That's the first phase. We are launching it in June end. By June end, it will be the first phase will be launched, and we'll move forward. Entire exports or imports will be totally digitalized using the various platforms. The other important aspect about the YONO, as we speak now for the corporate, we have allowed them not only to do e-trade transactions, but also book the forex transactions simultaneously.
Okay.
And upload once they have either on the past performance mode or on a documentary evidence mode. If they want to book the forex transactions, they can do it through the YONO app itself. So we are integrating everything, making ease of doing business as one of the important aspects for them. And on top of it, imagine the amount of paper that we'll not utilize.
Absolutely.
And that in turn results in sustainable green project which we're planning to do and achieve that. So SBI is in the forefront in introducing these digital initiatives, and I'm sure it's going to go a long way, particularly the way in which government is supporting for introducing this the national logistic portal, which is they're planning to launch, bringing it out, and the NLP that is coming to cater to the various areas. It's going to be in a big way, and there is no alternative to it. We need to go and see that it translates into the maximum business. In fact, Singapore has introduced the entire digitalization, DIPA, which was introduced there. And they entered into agreements with Australia, with New Zealand, and other countries, where all entire trade transactions will happen through the digital front. And last time when we had an interaction between the Commerce Minister of India and the Trade Minister of Singapore, this is one of the topics that was discussed to introduce digitalization. So that's how it is.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you for the response. I'll take the next one. And since I guess we are running out of time, possibly maybe this is the last question I will be able to pose to each one of you. This question is to Mr. Ajay. Sir, now that the RCEP is behind us, but still there are possibly some gateways to reach ASEAN markets and to be relevant in the reconfiguring global value chains. Could you exemplify the options available for India and any other final remarks on the theme that you want to tell to the larger audience? Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. So on RCEP, it was a 16-country bloc. One was India. Out of 15 countries, except for China, we have FTAs with everyone or we are negotiating. So we have FTAs with Japan, Korea, and ASEAN countries.
True.
We have FTAs with ASEAN, Japan, and Korea. And we are negotiating with Australia and New Zealand. So except China, we are connected to everyone. So we have almost a free trade with almost all the countries of RCEP except China. Then about last month, I read one paper, one very small interesting paper from ADB about the benefits RCEP to member countries. So I saw 85% of the benefits are going only to countries. China, South Korea, and Japan. No other country is getting anything. That paper is in the public domain. So personally, I don't think we are badly hurt because of not doing RCEP. Now, what we are doing, India is talking to many countries for doing FTAs, and at the same time, we are strengthening our domestic front. We discussed this. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, coming back to Mr. Ramesh, your take on, we know that this budget, as well as we've been talking about it, huge impetus on infrastructure as well as in, defense production. So could you kindly tell us how this will help the sector, especially the international sector, to upscale ourselves? There is always a talk that if you crack defense production, then you have cracked a whole lot of other things that is going to help you with so many other things, including the improving competitiveness to produce and so on. So your take on that and any other remarks that you want to mention as part of the theme, since we are running out of time, as your final remarks. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll quickly delve upon this.
please.
Defense exports is always a sector with a high entry barrier, and India traditionally has been, a major importer of defense products. We had never had a focus on this part. At least if we are starting today, there will be quite a huge, a distance to cover to gain access into the defense sector. One advantage with defense production or export is you can derive multiple benefits out of the developments research from this particular sector, and the MSMEs will be quite closely integrated with this complete sector. On the capex part, at least with this particular budget, had increased the defense-related capital expenditure by around 12 to 13%. So that's a very good, impetus there, and bulk of it can come from non-PSU defense-related industries. So that means homegrown industries will be given that much of an additional business scope is there. Of course, once the acceptance with Indian defense forces are there, then we can always look at exporting our, defense equipments to our at least immediate neighborhood. Recently, I attended the Aero India show in Bangalore. There was so much of vibrancy, even in this, pandemic era. So many companies participated. A lot of companies had been doing great. I'm talking about the private companies. So many agreements are being put in place. Of course, on our own front, India Exim Bank has been supporting defense exports through our policy business programs, say line of credits or bias credit program under National Export Insurance Account. So there had been quite a big focus on developing markets for our defense manufacturing. Now, on the infrastructure front, I think it's a quite big news. Yesterday, the cabinet cleared the new institution for promoting infrastructure, and yesterday, Honorable FM was mentioning the kind of immediate support coming in by way of 20,000 crore, which is already budgeted. Another 5,000 crore being going to be provided, and the possibility of scaling it up to the extent of 3 lakh crore. That is a very, very good news to any of the industries or, stakeholders involved in the infrastructure front. The dedicated freight corridors, the national highways expansion, and the whole concept of bringing in the cash flows due to the fast tag, crediting it into the lenders, and then monetizing these particular assets through the InvITs. So there is a new structuring which has been proposed in this budget, which shows us a very brighter side of this particular sector, which had been always a bane to most of the lenders. So I think things are going to be good in this part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ramesh. I'll take the last question to Professor Rangarajan also, and then come back to Mr. Nageshwar. With that, I think we'll be able to wind up the discussion. Mr. Rangarajan, Professor Rangarajan, we all know that, we want to be a 5 trillion economy, but we also know that unless otherwise there is going to be a substantial contribution from the international business, we are not going to be there. So this is a kind of a catch-22 situation, but our exports are not ranking up, but COVID has put a great, stumbling block in that, and we are trying to claw back. So in these kind of stakes, how do you see the future moving, and in our, whether compared to our ambition, where we want to be, and the reality? Can you put a perspective on that, one? And two, any other final remarks which you want to say connected to the theme that we are talking about today?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, this 5 trillion economy, especially when we are talking about achieving this kind of a 5 trillion, etc. Definitely, as you said, without the exports and international business, high involvement in international business, etc., it may not be possible. In spite of some of our trading partners were in hotspots, and we were suffering some demand shocks, etc. In spite of that, if you look into February figures, right, February 21 figures, of course, the estimates and actuals. In fact, actuals are giving us some kind of a comfort. Okay, I was estimating bad, but still, it has grown. So I'm optimistic when it comes to the long run. India is going to definitely have, especially when it comes to the exports and adjusting ourselves to these kind of global value chain, etc. Is definitely because India has witnessed similar kind of lot of such situations, be it a financial shock or the dot-com burst or something. So many things we have witnessed. The only blessing in disguise for us is our own domestic. We have enough space to do the trials and all kind of things because our own huge market. And more than that, the strong factors of production, especially the human resource factor, right? The way in which they're thinking and the way in which they try to integrate and then respond to the things are better. But still, what I would say is yes, there is a need for us to refocus and realign things. Like let me even go with simple kind of examples. Like we have excellent talents, but the industry which deserves doesn't get it. Right. For example, see, I think 5 years back, or sometimes when we were really getting into some kind of a downfall, the construction industry was crying that we don't have those kind of skilled guys because all the civil engineers are going to Wipro and Infosys. And where
That's
do
automotive.
I go to? Yeah, where do the construction industry get a good kind of person who can look at the building so that it becomes strong? Right. So see, this is where I think we need to again, probably the skill building program, etc., what has been aimed, instead of openly saying that that is what the government is trying to do. Ki, yaar, please stick to some of your skill sets so that those industries can benefit out of those skill sets, etc. That is required. Otherwise, no, with this kind of a human resource and betting on this kind of a human resource, we may not derive benefits. Right. That is one. And secondly, coming into another fear of okay, is WTO becoming irrelevant? Are we moving towards deglobalization? This will happen, that will happen. See, just now I gave you a simple statistics. When you find that the top 5 industries which matter to the globe is already internationalized so much, will it be possible for you to do a control alt delete and then say no, yeah, from tomorrow onwards you guys concentrate on your own countries? Because the
And
businessman won't
deglobalization.
digest this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the business world may not be able to digest and reorient themselves, so they will definitely find a way as to how to jump this kind of a barrier what is getting created, even if some protectionism measures which are getting implemented. That is because I always believe that the businessman logic works a lot than the policy logic. The best example for that is NAFTA. NAFTA was imposed. People, US was thinking that okay, I'll keep Mexico as my production platform. Unfortunately, things have shifted to China and South Asia. Even their own coveted kind of product producers, Levi's, etc., they shifted. Levi's, Burlington, everyone shifted their base of manufacturing to this because they understand business logic rather than your policy input as whatever you give. So that means that essentially brings me as to how well the policy initiatives can integrate these kind of disintegrated elements. And as far as I see from the Indian perspective, definitely it is going to, it is not that it is not achievable. We may be able to realign ourselves and we will be definitely be part of the GVC. The only thing is, of course, it is not that one of the major weakness what we see in the Indian context is, uh, see, there is a kind of a disjoint between what at the central, from the central level, what is being driven down and to what extent it has been taken at the state level.
Okay.
That is a major thing. Whatever I have in my kind of a little experience, whatever I have visited the states, etc., the kind of a disjoint. See, it's not that you are competing with a bigger policy and with a smaller policy, etc. That is really a bad thing. Probably the political mindset is also very important when it comes to these kind of things. If at all it has to benefit the economy as a whole, people need to rethink about it. Fine, you may have political differences, ideological differences, But see, a businessman is a businessman and a consumer is a consumer, whether he belongs to any kind of a political party or a political ideology. At the end of the day, that matters rather than by what ideologies we are following. Probably that gap has to be addressed in one way or other. So then definitely it is doable. Like when it comes to the skill building or when it comes to the creating this kind of an adaptive kind of a system, what is required, what is the need of the hour. Definitely, I am fully optimistic that yes, we will be part of this global value chain, and we may be able to contribute better to the global value chain. Unlike what Bangladesh is doing. See, in spite of Bangladesh doing a great job in textiles, Darji remains a Darji. Right? What they are doing. They are doing a simple tailoring job because they cannot have the complete value chain, a fabric base. They may not be able to get. When you look at the kind of other constraints what they have, so those constraints I don't think they may be able to address very fast and compete. But at the same time, we should not undermine people like Vietnam or Pakistan feeling that okay, these guys may take a lot of time. Definitely it is not going to happen. Just an information to the other audience also, like at one point of time we always thought that Pakistan is majorly exporting fabrics. They are coming in big way in garment exports. Probably if we don't now raise to that kind of a levels and the value additions whatever is required, etc., probably we may again lose, right? They may be I still remember when I was addressing a gathering in Tirupur in 2003, I said that you watch Bangladesh and watch Vietnam. At that time they were saying, they were laughing at me, sir, professors are always like this. Fine, now you can see 2021 what is happening. I am still there, you are also there, but on top of you these guys have already gone. So that is what it is. I think probably we should be able to foresee some of these things and adjust ourselves. Then only we may be, because most often every time you make a mistake and then try to correct it may not help. Sometimes you have to do. That is why engineers always look for preventive maintenance, right? So probably it is high time for us
do it right
to
the
do.
first time.
Yes, it is high time for us to do some preventive maintenance also. With that, again, thanks to SBIL, thanks to the dean especially, okay,
No,
for
no issues.
inviting me to this kind of.
No issues. I'll give a vote of thanks. Finally, be around. Sir.
No, for
Yeah.
inviting me to this kind of an audience. It is nice
Absolutely.
talking to you about some of my ideas. Thanks a
Yes.
lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for a detailed response. And I was just scurrying through when we were discussing the chat boxes also. So I thought those are a lot of observations. I thought one question I'll pick it for Mr. Nageshwar to answer. There is one question there which asks that a replacement of LIBOR by IBOR in future and its impact.
I think we need to have a special session on
okay. On that, I see.
But yes, one of the important things that's going to happen in the financial markets today is the cessation of LIBOR, which at least from the time that we joined into these financial institutions or much before that, LIBOR is in shape. And then imagine trillions of dollars are dealt with in that particular benchmark. And it is available in different currencies for different tenors. Suddenly, we find that from 31st December 2021, LIBOR will cease to exist and there will be an alternate reference rates. One thing that in the markets, when I used to talk about and interact, one of the important things that we used to say that Indian markets do not have a benchmark rates the way in which LIBOR is there across the globe. Indian markets has got only overnight rates and do not have term curve. True. But now I'm happy to note that world over, it's going to be only overnight rates and term rates are not going to be there. But having said that, this is an alternate reference rate. Each of the country, I mean, like US is coming out with SOFR, Sonia is going to be there in UK, and each of these currency is going to have their own reference rates. And more importantly, the corporates who are participating in this meeting right now, they need to ensure that their liabilities are switched over to these new reference rates. And there are going to be challenges because the rates between the SOFR and the current LIBOR, because LIBOR is an unsecured, SOFR is a secured one. There are going to be differences. The term curve is not developed. There are settlement issues. There are ways in which the payments are going to happen. And the way in which the systems are preparedness to calculate the rates, because it will be interest in arrears, not the normal compounding of interest. Whole lot of things are there, and we need to make an impact analysis and do that. So corporates needs to be prepared for this transition from LIBOR to the alternate reference rate. Incidentally, State Bank of India was the first bank to do an interbank deal in Hong Kong almost a couple of weeks back. And yesterday, we were the first bank to do the SOFR loan with the Indian Oil Corporation. I think most of you would have seen in the newspapers. We were the first bank in India to do the SOFR loan. And it's a very important, and I would suggest to Dr. Krishna Kumar, we can have a full-length discussion on this LIBOR, which is going to be a major event for the world. Okay. And but just to take one step forward, one important point which I would like to say.
Please, sir.
When the pandemic had hit, we were all worried about what will happen to the economy. Would that economy go into a L-shaped or a U-shaped curve or a K-shaped? Many of them have talked about it. But the way in which the measures have been taken by the government of India, thanks to the leaders, thanks to the political willpower and the conviction which these people have, thanks to the Reserve Bank of India, we are, as we speak now, we are one of the economies, we are very confident that we are going to close with a V-shaped economy. And the dream of $5 trillion, which we discussed, will be achievable. With this, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the exhaustive response. And I mean, once again, thank each one of the panelists for the wonderful discussion and the insights that you have all shared. I guess Mr. Ajay is also there. If you could, switch on the video, sir, or I don't know whether he has logged out. Yes, sir. I was just trying to thank each one of you for the wonderful discussion and for contributing, coming forward and contributing in this particular forum. And my particular thanks for the participation from the India Exim Bank and also to Mr. Ramesh. There has been a whole lot of people who had coordinated from your side, from Exim Bank side, from Mr. Pragladan Iyer and his team and so on. And as far as our SBIL is concerned, I need to thank our director, Mr. Saroj Kumar, and a whole lot of team members, the systems team, marketing team, my faculty colleagues and so on, who had been hugely benefited by this forum. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again, each one of you, for having come on board and contributing to this theme. In fact, this is one of the major themes which we did as far as exports is concerned. I was finding that, we had not addressed that part. We had done earlier conversations on MSME and so on and so forth, as director was pointing out about nearly 70 and odd themes. And, this is one of the themes which I thought that we should not miss out, especially at a very crucial time the country is placed. And, we cannot touch a 5 trillion economy without focusing, at least a good part of it coming from exports is a known thing, as we all know. And it is in that context that this particular deliberations made a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you first.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.